So yeah, so I'm gonna put up this PowerPoint that I'm gonna show you like on Schoology eventually. And there's a bunch of other resources on Schoology that I'll actually show you. But let's see if we can start here. Okay, so I'm gonna give you a quick kind of overview, and then we'll talk a little bit about different parts of it, the rubric and things like that. So if you don't know, there's a lot of acronyms in IB. The IA stands for the thing that every class has one, and in our case, it's a big lab report. Internal assessment, meaning it's graded here by me. So it's ends up being a 6-12 page paper. It's about an experiment. It's a very broad topic. You basically can design and conduct your own experiment under anything in chemistry that you can imagine. It's very open-ended, and you might think that makes things easier, but actually in my experience, it makes things more challenging because it just gives you so many more decisions that you have to make. It's unfortunate that we were doing this distance learning right now. This is when we would be doing a lot of practice and design and that kind of thing. But we're just gonna have to make the best of it. So what has to happen in the initial stage is we have to come up with some ideas, and expect it to be kind of frustrating. There's going to be some back and forth. You're probably going to come up with one or more ideas that I'm going to say no to, and you might have a little bit of a hard time refining your methodology. So notice that we're starting now, and let's just assume that next year is going to happen like relatively normally. This experimentation is probably not going to actually happen till October. But that's how important I think it is that we start thinking about this right now and how much refining it takes. We're going to starting it months in advance. So typically what we've done in the past is we've pulled out all the IB science kids at the same time, the same day, and you do your experimentation like in 1 8-hour school day, basically. That might seem like a long time to do an experiment, but if you don't come in prepared, you're not going to finish. So we need to get you prepared so that you can finish during that in-class field trip that, again, assuming next year goes basically normally, is probably going to be in October. So just some things, again, just a few things to keep in mind as you're doing this. Like if it comes to your mind that, oh, I'm going to do an experiment and I need a solution for it. I need some kind of solution, or maybe I need 5 different concentrations of solutions. You understand that you're going to have to make those yourself. Of course, if it's a salt solution, let's say, like the salt will be there, the NaCl, but if you need a 1 molar salt solution, you're going to have to mix that, you're going to have to make it, you're going to have to get out the volumetric flasks and all that. So think about all those kind of details, and all that kind of stuff is time consuming. And that's one of the reasons why the chemistry IA is one of the hardest, is certainly most labor intensive to do compared to the other ones. I mean, in that physics class, like get out a couple meter sticks, boom, you're done. You might have hours of work to do, like before you even can start experimenting. So think about that in terms of your design. And so what ends up happening, and I'm going to talk more about what the paper looks like in a second, but you make a draft, and I'm allowed to give you sort of pretty limited comments, but there is some comments I can give you about how to improve it. That would be probably if the time frame is normal, beginning of second semester, we're talking in 2021 is when you would get this back. Then you'd have a chance to refine the IA, you turn it in again, I grade it, and you get a score. And that's the one that ends up getting used. So I give that to Mr. Jones. He literally you get a score from 1 to 24, I tell him your number, I put in all the scores, and then it spits out some names. And spit out 5 or 6 names, and then somebody else, a moderator, grades those, and they either say I'm grading too hard or I'm not grading hard enough, and then they raise and lower everyone's scores, probably lower, most likely. I've never had them raised or kept the same. So if you ever think I'm a real like hard grader or whatever, understand that the IB people think that I'm not a hard enough grader usually, and keep that in mind when you see your score on your IA. In the past, out of 24, I've been knocked down, about it. Sometimes they'll knock more down from the high end and the low end or whatever, but I've been knocked down about 2 to 3 points. So maybe they take 2 or 3 points from the high. So something you give a 22 ends up getting a 17 or something like that. And by the way, don't feel free. That's kind of the overview part. And I know, there's a lot to wrap your head around, but questions just about the process.
So is this like when we got the list of names of kids in our group or whatever before spring break?
No, yeah, that's something entirely different. And that's another thing that would have been a nice little bit of practice for this, unfortunately. But that's a totally separate thing it's called the Group 4 project, which is a collaborative thing between other classes. And that thing, we're just basically canceling it due to COVID. So you're not going to have to do that at all. So a different thing, it is similar because that also involves an experiment, but no, this is just for chemistry. That's a good question. I had forgotten about that. Other questions about the process? I see a question. Yeah, there is. It is. I've had kids do certain things, and it wouldn't be unusual at all. Like maybe we have a class period before where we do some of the prep work. Like maybe you do need a bunch of solutions, or maybe people need to work on making solutions and having those ready. So yeah, I've done that. I've done that before. Anything else about the process?
This is individual, right? Or are we doing it in groups?
Yeah, it's individual. Yeah. So you all have to come up with your own experiment. And so that's one of the things that's crazy about it. There's going to be 28, however many there are of you, 28 different experiments, chemistry experiments happening in the same room at the same, well, hopefully we can get 2 rooms because 28 in one room is nuts. So yeah, that part's a little crazy. Anything else? So I mainly want to focus on kind of the idea part of it right now, but I do think it's also important for you to know a little bit about the rubric and how the rubric works and where the score comes from, because that should be part of your planning. So there's 24 points total. The first section is called personal engagement. And basically that means, is the reader who reads this convinced? Well, one of the parts is, does it seem like this is something that's relevant to you? Does it seem like you actually had some input in the design? Or did you do something that was basically pretty clearly copied off the internet with no changes? By the way, I mean, you shouldn't do that, of course. It's pretty hard. I'll show you the rubric. It's pretty hard to score 2 there. And don't lie. Like people will tell, really silly stories about, oh, I'm so interested in, energetics, been curious about this my whole life or whatever. And you just get these ridiculous stories. So don't lie about it. But I'll talk a little bit more about that, but it just is how much it seems interesting to you. And is there some input that you had in the design? Exploration is, there need to be some background information. You need to have researched background information here. And then the actual experiment itself is what exploration is mostly. So how well designed your experiment is and things like that, and how well you put in some background that sort of set the stage. Analysis is basically what you might think of as calculations and data tables and things like precision and significant figures and random uncertainty and all of that kind of stuff goes in this analysis section. So like if you use a graduated cylinder, did you write it down with the correct number of digits? Are you displaying the digits appropriately with the appropriate precision? And then are your calculations right and things like that? Evaluation is what you might think of as the conclusion, basically. There's error analysis here. There's systematic error that you should talk about here. Different things like that, ways for improvement, flaws in the lab, that kind of stuff is evaluation. And the last part is communication, which is kind of a overall category. How does it look? Does it flow well? Are the data tables kind of look nice? Are you using scientific terms properly? Things like grammar aren't necessarily going to be, penalized heavily because, IB understands that some people are writing in their second language and things like that. So it's not necessarily grammar per se, although if your grammar was atrocious to the point where it's hard to understand, that could potentially impact it. But you're not going to, lose a point there for putting a comma where it shouldn't be or vice versa and things like that. And then if you add that all up, it adds up to 24 points. Questions about any of those? And I also, by the way, the rubric is posted to school. It's been on Schoology actually. So, and I'm going to show it to you, but anything coming to mind about the rubric? Okay.
Um,
Go ahead. Sorry.
Can we like, after we have like constructed our IAs, can we ask you if our like annotations, like when we're talking about calculations, if that's translated correctly? Can we ask you that?
Are you saying here are these calculations, and you want ask me if, like, you want me to check your calculations? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like if it makes sense, if we're doing scientific notation correctly and all of that.
Well, so certainly to an extent, okay? After you know, that's the sort of thing that I would comment on your draft. So you could change that between here and there. I definitely can't like do your calculations for you or anything like that. If you got really stuck with your calculations, what I could possibly do is maybe we could look at some similar examples. But yeah, what I definitely couldn't do is like take your data and crunch your numbers for you. So I can help you, you know, and we can work around it. And again, you have that revision opportunity. So other questions? You guys are asking.
I have a question. So when you're going over our IAs like the first time, can you give us like our potential scores for like the categories and stuff?
You know, I don't like to do that. It's a bit of a gray area, and I could give you like a really rough ballpark, but I don't like to do that just because it's a gray area, and it's also, I don't know. I just don't think I don't think it's a very good idea in the big picture. And I've thought about this. I don't think it really, because what I want you to do is improve what's wrong with it, right? So I'd rather just tell you what's incorrect with it. The best thing. What I hate to have happen is me give some score and then like somebody says, "Oh, I'm satisfied with that." And maybe they don't change the things I want them to change or things. I just think I don't like doing that. But I will tell you what you should fix. That's what's important.
All right. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
To a degree, if you listen to what IB tells you, like the help I'm supposed to give is just so extremely general. So, you know, in other words, I wouldn't say like, fix this calculation right here. You got the wrong answer to this one right here. But I might say, you know, maybe double check the calculations in this part, or do you have your measurements written down properly in this section? Things like that are the level of comments I'm supposed to give. Because, you know, keep in mind, this is kind of like a test. It's a test that you have ability to revise and practice, but it's supposed to be your own work. Anything else about the rubric? So we're going to look at the rubric in a second. It's graded holistically. This is what it says. So in other words, you're not going to have a section that's like personal engagement, and here's where I must get all my personal engagement points and all of that. It all comes as a whole. Now, it certainly does help to put things into sections sometimes to help people see that, so that the graders, including me, don't miss stuff. But that's not the way it works. And communication and personal engagement especially are overall categories, as it says. So this is what one of the sections of the rubric looks like. This is the exploration part. And I bring this one up because this is the one you're going to be thinking about first. I would say this and personal engagement are what you're going to be thinking about first. So one thing that's a little confusing about this is, remember, the total score is only 6. That's the maximum you could get for exploration. That's it. And so there are these what they call mark bands. So what it says down here is you're supposed to take a best fit approach. So this is what that means. It means you do not necessarily need to hit all of these things in the bottom line to get a 5 or a 6. For example, so topic in question, we're going to talk more about the RQ in a moment. You know, maybe I read yours, maybe I think, yeah, that's pretty good. That's like a 6. It's awesome, actually. And then maybe the background wasn't so good. Maybe that's like a 4. But they did do the methodology and safety. They managed to hit that. And so maybe if I think you're here, 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 and here, I might go ahead and give a 5 or a 6 or whatever in this category. So it's kind of just a guessing game of where yours fits in the best. And like I said, you know, maybe the moderator doesn't quite agree and I give you a 5 and they end up getting a 4 in that part. And that's how the whole class's grades ultimately get dropped by 1. So that's why I need to try to grade these as closely as possible. Safety, you know, and it's also the case that I don't think all of these are necessarily weighted equally. So, you know, if you're doing a relatively safe lab and we have one sentence that says to put your goggles on, and yeah, that gets you to a 6 in safety. I don't think that necessarily is as weighted as much as these other ones. So it's kind of a guessing game in that sense. So I'm seeing some questions in chat about ideas. I'm going to talk about that in a second. So this is personal engagement. Now, so exploration 6 points, personal engagement 2 points. One thing I think that is kind of unfair about this rubric is I think in some cases you're actually held to a higher standard than what this rubric says. Like, because what IB does is every year they put out information about how you should be grading things. And I think it's pretty clear in some cases you're held to a higher standard. Because, for example, if you look at what it would take to get a 1 in personal engagement, the evidence of personal engagement with exploration is limited. So 1 is limited with little independent thinking. In other words, at a 1, you're already showing little independent thinking or creativity. The justification does not demonstrate personal significance. So at a 1, you're already not demonstrating personal significance. So how do you get a 0? And then this one says there is little evidence and so on. So this 1 is a very, very low bar. And to be honest, I do not give very many 2s. I think it's pretty hard to get a 2. I've gone years where I've basically given every single person a 1. I think the other thing about this is they never tell you, you don't get any feedback about like what parts of your grades are wrong. But I think that was one of the areas where I actually got dropped, is that some of the IB moderators didn't agree with me that it's pretty much impossible to get a 0. Although I think it is impossible to get a 0 if you look at this language. So I think you're held to a little bit higher standard in some cases than this rubric. So what ends up happening then is that all gets translated to a 1 through 7 score, just like your scores on your tests. And in theory, it can change. Remember, a 4 is passing. But typically from year to year, these are the grade breakdowns. So you only need 11. You need 11 out of 24 to get a 4. You know, which is, it shows you how hard that these are graded, basically, because less than a 50% is a 4. Are you going to get a Cherokee Trail grade for this? Yes, you are. It's going to be a lab grade. Am I going to give you a 48% if you get an 11 of 24? No, I am not. It would be like a large curve put on it, basically, and then put in as a lab score. Because I can't just give you your raw score. That's way too hard. Questions about any of that kind of scoring stuff? Okay, so.
Oh, I actually had a question about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, go ahead.
Do you know what the curve might be if we got a 4 on it?
So in my mind, a 4 is like a C-ish. So, you know, it would probably be, so if you, I think I may have spoken to you guys about the square root curve before. The way the square root curve works is your percentage as a decimal. If you take the square root of that decimal, that becomes your grade. So I happen to know, like, let's say you got a 50% of 0.5. The square root of 0.5 is 0.7. So like under the square root curve, a 50% becomes a 70%. It would probably be something even like square root curve plus 5%, something along those lines. So that would make an 11. 11 would probably end up being like a 75-ish. Other questions about that? Okay, so let me see here. So what I have typically done in the past is the summer assignment is to start thinking of some of these topics, and this year is no exception. I'm trying to think if I want to have you guys look at the rubric more. Yeah, let's just quickly. I think I have, yeah. So this is basically, someone has taken the official IB rubric, which is on like 20 pages, and like condensed it down to something that's just on 2 pages. So this is in school. There's an IA folder on Schoology. This is already on there and has been on there, but we already looked at these two are going to be the most relevant to you the most quickly, but it's a good idea to kind of know where you're going with this. And like I said, remember, this is the maximum. Maximum here is 2. It's not like you get 2, 2, and 2 to score 6 in personal engagement. It doesn't work that way. It's just wherever you fit best, you'll either get a 0, 1, or 2. Analysis is like your calculations, like I said, and this is going to kind of come up too in terms of your topic choice. I think I say this on the summer assignment, but you have to think about what kind of calculations you can do based on the design that you're coming up with. If the only calculations that you can do are like finding an average and maybe doing some adding and subtracting or something like that, it's going to be hard to score well in analysis. So this is basically about like what I was saying about you're held to a higher standard than the rubric says. There's really nothing in here about like the calculations are difficult or anything, and they don't have to be like, you don't have to be doing any calculus or anything like that. But it's just nice if you have some calculating to do. It's gonna if you are just finding averages, it's going to be really hard to get out of like a 3 especially in this processing category. Maybe your other parts could be really high and drag you out of that, but you're going to be at a 3 at best. If you're in this particular processing part, if your calculations are like super easy. So evaluation, that's going to come more later. Communication, kind of more later. But these 3, especially the processing, are what we want to think about probably when we're doing the planning. So let me show you this summer assignment document. This gives a little more information about actually choosing a category or a topic. It is going to be a grade for next school year. I'm assuming that we're going to start as normal. Obviously, if things change, things will change. But I want you to come up with 2 research questions. So the research question, technically, I'm not sure it actually has to be a question. I think you can have an aim, but try to come up with something that's actually phrased as a question, similar to what you're going to have to do on your EE. But basically, for the summer assignment, you're going to come up with at least 2 RQs, and you're going to come up with some variables. There's more details on that later. But let's just think about topics. Ideally, it's something that you're interested in. That way you can score that personal engagement without lying about it. You need to think about something that you can do in a high school classroom. I mean, it might be interesting to you to smash atoms together and find, neutrinos or whatever, but we can't do that in a high school classroom. And you have to be able to do it in 8 hours. It has to be something you can write a report in 6 to 12 pages. Now, that might seem like a lot, but by far, usually the problem is that people can't fit their IA in under 12 pages. What you got to remember is you're going to have things like big data tables and things like that take up a lot of space. So staying under 12 pages is by far the biggest problem. If you can't get to 6, you got a big issue anyway. So the problem tends to be staying under 12. Hopefully what you want, so we have to think about really, you got to think about an independent and dependent variable, right? The independent variable is the thing that you are changing, and the dependent variable is changing as a result of that. Hopefully, both of those, in a perfect world, both of those are going to be quantifiable, something you could actually measure and put a number to. If at the very least, now that doesn't always happen, but at the very, very least, your dependent variable needs to be quantifiable. You need to have an output of this that is measurable. And people sometimes try to come up with ideas where it's not. So, but ideally they both are. You got to know how to measure things. Like if you come up with an idea and you say, I want to test the effect of this thing on some other thing, but you have absolutely no idea how you would measure that outcome, then that's no good at all. You got to be able to measure the things that you're thinking about measuring. Now, I'm not stupid, right? Like I know what people do is they look online and they try to find designs, right? And very often, or they find just some straight up lab that's like some other college or high school is doing. Those are not going to score well, in particular in personal engagement. If you do a lab, that's something that is commonly done in the high school or college lab setting. Now, I know you guys don't know what's commonly done in the high school or lab setting, but I do, and the moderator does, and you're basically going to score a 0 in personal engagement if you do that. But you know, if you found the design just straight up online, like with a simple Google search, it probably means it's a standard lab. Now, could you take that idea and modify it and use it? Oh, that's how I can measure that thing that I wanted to measure. Now I'm going to tweak it in this way. By all means, I would encourage that, in fact. But some straight up thing, you don't want to do that. As I said earlier, you want to be able to do some calculations that are a little bit more than adding, subtracting. You know, if you're doing a bit of stoichiometry, that's fine. You know, a bit of whatever, finding like from the energetics, finding delta H's of reactions, all that. So I'm not talking like crazy calculus, like I said, nothing beyond things that we've done, but ideally something beyond simple averages and things like that. Something I've read many times, IB gives advice on what students should and should not be doing. You want to avoid check the label projects. These are some of the first things people think of, and I would very much encourage you not to do them. For example, test this thing of Tang and see how much vitamin C is in it, and then look at the label and compare it. Or I'm going to burn this peanut and see how many calories are in this peanut and compare it to the label of the peanut. Those are bad because IB doesn't like them. They're not really in the spirit of this. And also, again, that would be pretty standard. That would be a pretty standard lab for people to do. I do not want to understand. This is extraordinarily difficult. If you look at what IB wants you guys to do, it's extraordinarily difficult. And don't get me wrong, like I grasp that. It's borderline unfair, I think. But because it's so hard for you guys to come up with these topics that are actually good in what IB wants. Any questions come to mind on just like topic choice? So the topic is kind of what you want to, hone in on first, some kind of topic, and then we need to come up with an RQ. All the rubric really says is you need a relevant and fully focused research question. And this is nice with your EE. It's along the same lines. The EE is probably, could be a little more broad because your EE is going to be longer, if you guys have heard much about your EE yet. So, relevant and fully focused. And there's some examples here. It must be answerable by the investigation. You shouldn't have extra information in there. So let's just think about a student who's thinking through what they want to do. A student wants to test vitamin C content for 2 different methods of broccoli. First of all, I don't think that's a great idea in the first place, but let's just think it through anyway. So a couple of RQs they could come up with. A very bad one would be, which cooking method for broccoli, steaming or boiling, is better for human health? So that's a terrible RQ because you can't possibly learn anything about human health from the experiment that you're doing. That would take years. Can't be done in the high school classroom. Your experiment is going to tell you nothing about that. What the student is doing is simply assuming that more vitamin C is better for human health. Maybe not, but your IA is certainly not going to give you any evidence to that regard. So your RQ has to be answerable. A better one might be, which cooking method for broccoli, steaming for 10 minutes or boiling for 10 minutes causes greater quantity of vitamin C to be retained in the vegetable? See, so it's very specific. Notice it includes times. It includes the variable. It includes the independent variable, which is the steaming versus boiling, and it includes the dependent variable. Again, I don't think this is an awesome idea. I think it's okay. It would be better than just testing broccoli and finding vitamin C in it, or testing an orange and finding vitamin C in it, because at least there's some variable that's being changed. But it is at least focused, and somebody did this year, and it is okay. It's fine. It worked. Something similar, something along those lines. What IB kind of wants, if possible, and I may have mentioned this before in class, is a 5x5 experiment, meaning 5 variations of the independent variable and 5 repeated trials. So if temperature is an independent variable, you're running the thing at 5 temperatures, and then you're trying to repeat it 5 times. So maybe it's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 Celsius or whatever, and then you're running it 5 times at 10 degrees, 5 times at 20 degrees, and so on. So that's another thing to think about in terms of your topic. Here's a few more example RQs. How does the concentration of ascorbic acid and pH of the fruit juice and the amount of CO2 produced with time vary with time? Yeast is allowed to ferment in the following fruits. So this is a bad RQ because it's bringing up a bunch of things. It's a bunch of variables. It's not focused. This question is not answerable because you're trying to change several variables at the same time. Obviously, that's the classic kind of blunder in experiment. So not good, mainly because it's not focused. How does repeated heating affect vegetable oil? This is better than the first one, I would argue, but it's also problematic because it's not very specific. It doesn't really say or give much hints as to what's going on in the investigation. So maybe this is kind of a better version of the first question. How does repeated heating? Notice they put like the time and temperature in there, and cooling, and they put that in there, of unrefined palm oil. So maybe that's the oil they're talking about here, from Ghana, affect its peroxide value over 10 heating and cooling cycles. So maybe this person was actually going to do this experiment, but the second version of it is a much better one. This website right here has kind of a bunch more stuff about picking topics. And so that's something that you could look through, on your own time if you wanted to. Questions about RQs and topic choice?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So when you said that the broccoli one wasn't a great choice, what would have made it better?
Well, so it's borderline one of these test check the label type projects. It's borderline of that. Notice if we think about the 5x5 thing, there's really only 2 variations of the independent variable here. So that's one problem with it. I would say those are the biggest problems with it, is it doesn't really have enough variables, and it's borderline kind of a check the label thing.
Okay, so should we try to pick something that we can experimentally determine a value and then theoretically determine?
I mean, it seems like what IB wants you to do is develop a completely new chemistry theory or something like that, which is impossible. It's not impossible, but it's hard. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would start to think about the things that seem kind of interesting. I would rather you pick something that you wanted to do and had some interest in, at least, as opposed to try to shoehorn something into this and make it work that you're less interested in. But yeah, I think it's like you think of a topic of interest, you kind of think of some RQs, and then through this revision process, maybe we can get you an RQ that's good. I don't know if that even answered your question, but that's why we have to start this revision so early, right?
Yeah.
Because like, you know, I don't even know if the person who did this, I don't even know if they gave me an RQ originally, but their first one was something like this. And there were some other things that they want to do too. And I think and eventually after maybe 4 or 5 revisions, you know, we landed something on more like this one, which was at least doable.
Okay, thank
So
you.
it's just going to take some back and forth and revisions. Other questions about that? So, you know, the I's did not turn out great for my group this year, and it was a failure on some of their parts from just doing what I asked them to do, and just started bad and ended bad for a lot of them. How it started bad is a lot of them didn't really do this summer assignment. They like blew it off or whatever. They didn't really have anything for me. And it's like I said, you start in a bad spot, and then they wouldn't listen to me when like I told them to change things. So it got ugly, and that was what their IB score was based upon. So that could happen again. It absolutely could. I don't think it will, but it absolutely could. So that's why we want to try real hard on this. So what I want you to do, and again, I know that this is hard. Okay, I do know that it's hard, but I want you to try to come up with 2 RQs. So basically, you're going to kind of fill this little thing out for each one. What is my research question? What is the independent variable? How am I going to measure that? Oh, wait, this is the one. I'm going to change this. Yeah, no, never mind. This is good. Yeah. How will that be measured? Now, sometimes, you know, like in the experiment above, the guy's independent variable was boiling versus steaming. That's not a quantifiable independent variable. That's another problem with it. But how are you going to measure that? The dependent variable, you definitely have to be, if you can't measure a dependent variable, you don't have an experiment. So that has to be measured. Then think about, oh, what do you have to control? Like in that broccoli experiment, like, wow, there's actually lots of things to think about in terms of how you're preparing that broccoli. And there's a bunch of stuff. So what do you have to control? And then can you find some background information, because you need that. And so as best as you possibly can, I want you to fill this out for 2 different RQs. You know, expect some frustration. Of those who did, you know, at least put some form of effort into this, it's definitely possible I'll have to reject both of your RQs, or at least have you very, very significantly change them. So if you want to think of a 3rd one or something, or as many as you can, that's fine. But that's what the summer assignment is going to be. And assuming that we have normal school, I will be looking at this when you walk in on the first day next year. So that's the assignment. And this is, I believe I just posted this to Schoology, and I'll double check, but questions about that? Okay, what I want to do is show you just a couple of things on Schoology and what you're supposed to do this week. If you give me just a second. Okay. So this IA materials has been here since the beginning, but there is some stuff here. Here's a checklist. That's going to be probably more helpful when you're actually, yeah, this inventory is not going to be, this inventory is not going to be up to date. So let's just unpublish that. so there's some examples in here. There's some stuff about graphing and all of that. The rubric. This, if you click through this, this is a guide for teachers, but there's actually there's more examples if you look in here. But what's maybe more relevant is the stuff from this week. So one thing I think is useful is to look at an IA, of course. So there's this one that supposedly a student did. This is provided by IB itself. So supposedly a student did. This is definitely a pretty good one. But one thing I want you to do is read through this and just take your best crack at grading it. And I know you're kind of just going to be guessing and trying to figure out where it belongs. But what ends up happening is, and this is the summer assignment, like I mentioned, what this is, right at this very second, if you looked at this, you wouldn't see this because it's hidden right now. But this asks you a couple questions about it, and then it asks you to give it a grade. And then when you're done, it's going to tell you the correct answers, which is what the moderator gave it. So I'm doing this just so you can get a feel for what an IA is like, and this experience of trying to grade it. And then, so, you know, if you give analysis a 4 and the moderator gives it a 5 or whatever, it's going to count your answer wrong. So it doesn't matter what your score is on this. You're going to get completion points for that. And then this one is a quiz that's just about, this is going to go in the quiz section. And it's just a quiz about, you know, the things we've been talking about. You get 2 chances at it, and it's 10 points. So just questions about the process and how the IA works is what that is. Oh, and then let me show you. So there are more examples. There's a whole folder of examples. And the egg white one is actually in here again. It's in here twice. So most of these have a way for you to see the score. Like the gelatin one and their comments on there. This was one. So there's examples in here of all kinds, kind of like higher, lower, middle ones in here. I think it's useful to look at all kinds. This one was given a perfect 24 out of 24 by, this came from a teacher. So I don't know if the moderator agreed and also gave it, but it's really good. That's for sure. Some of these are hard to understand. Some of these have a hard time believing that a student actually wrote, because most of the ones here, except for this one and this one, are provided by IB itself. So I don't know if a student actually wrote them. Yeah, I think that's kind of the main thing. Questions about any of that? So what you might want to do, you know, if you find yourself with some time, I'm basically officially on duty for the next 2 weeks at least. It wouldn't be bad to, you know, if you wanted to start thinking about RQs and email me things and like, what do you think of this? Wouldn't be a horrible idea to start doing that now, just because it's pretty hard, like I said, and you might, if you do this on the day before school starts, you might realize, wow, this is very hard. I have no idea, and then you'll show up on the next day with a blank page. So it wouldn't be a horrible idea to start bouncing some ideas off if you wanted to, and I'll check my email, you know, sporadically throughout the summer as well. But I just can kind of guarantee that I'm going to be around for the next couple of weeks on a basically daily basis. Okay. So thank you guys. Thank you so much for coming and stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Appreciate all your hard work. And yeah, let me know if you have questions. Okay. Bye-bye. Have a great summer if I don't see you around at all. Bye-bye.